Nick's strengths have been primarily dealing with a fantasy world, and he admitted himself he wasn't as comfortable dealing with the technological aspects of the setting, which is nearly 50%. So, I mean, a sword's a sword, armor is armor. We didn't have to create armor for Amethyst because it's basically the same armor you would grab or use from Player's Handbook. But since Amethyst has to create an entire technological side from the ground up, all of that had to be constructed. So we weren't given a reprieve for the technological aspects. We had to create all of that. So that includes, of course, the variety of the weapons and the vehicles being used. We had to create these 4 Tekken classes, so each one had to be presented. So that's all new artwork. Nick didn't have to do artwork for a fighter or a rogue because that's been done. You know what they look like. But for things like this grounder, which is one of our most popular, one of my personal favorite images, has to be constructed from the ground up. Now, drawing the guy is, well, I wouldn't say it's simple. It's easier for Nick, impossible for me, but it's something that I think that he's more used to. But the technological aspects, the weapons, he said would be more difficult. That being said, of course, is that, once again, he makes things look easy, and he presents us with not one, but in fact dozens of weapons, all of which are impressive and interesting and unique, and show that even when he claims he may be uncomfortable, it still allows him to tap into a reservoir of his imagination that was always there, and he ends up creating something that's truly brilliant. And there's no greater example of that than with the vehicles, which was something that I was probably most concerned about, because I really didn't think that anyone could properly represent the large vehicles. They're called ETVs, and players, if they're creating a Tekken group, have the capacity at some point to own or operate one or even several of these, from the smaller the bikes to these massive vehicles, right? These Ekin terrain vehicles, which have to be large because they have to defend themselves, they have to be self-sufficient, and they have to shield themselves from outside enchantment. So these things end up being just enormous. I mean, they make the Abrams M1 Abrams tank look like a little tiny Fiat. So you have these vehicles like the Scrambler, which is the bottom image here. I said it's got to be this huge vehicle. It looks like this massive all-terrain vehicle. I said it had to have a whole bunch of headlights in the front because that was its signature. And both it and a few of the other vehicles, because they're large and long, they're actually segmented. So they actually twist. In the case of the Scrambler, it actually has 3 segments, so it can actually snake around more demanding terrain. And we look at the vehicles like the Nuke Truck, and which is just basically this bulldozer, nuclear-powered bulldozer that you just plow through your terrain and you just uproot trees and so forth. And I was amazed that he was able to create these images and with very little input. We look at even the armor, and the armor is unique. And from these larger power suits to these more svelte spider suits, it's really fascinating. And the fact that, like, my group just adores the large power armor. It feels very realistic. It feels like something that could actually be built. The irony, of course, is that we're seeing machines that that look very similar to these in several modern films that just came out this year. One's still in the theaters now, and I actually found ours to be a bit more plausible than the ones that are presented in those films.
Part of what is so appealing to me about this setting is the fact that the women aren't your typical triple D cup, scantily clad vixens of most fantasy and sci-fi settings. Being married for more than 19 years and having 4 beautiful daughters, I have several reasons why I don't sit around illustrating half-naked women. Chris and I may not share the same reasons for not wanting to include that sort of element in the images, but it certainly makes it more enjoyable to work on nonetheless.
Well, it's interesting that he brings that up, because that was actually an interesting point when dealing with this piece of artwork right here with the Damascans. When he drew the original Damascus race, which is this Limshaw custodian, he had drawn her with an open waist. You could see her lower chest. And I sent back a note to Nick saying, well, this is fantastic. This is actually really good. I just don't agree why we should have her chest exposed. The Kawabari armor is completely enclosed head to toe. And it looks like she has the buttons on her coat undone. Well, both the character and the race, they just wouldn't do that. There's no reason to expose this vulnerability. She would keep her leather armor firmly secured up. And Nick came back saying, you're absolutely right. I'm just too used to always showing some skin whenever I'm asked to draw a female character. And I said to Nick, well, you want to get out of that habit. I want all the female representation, the characters, to be realistic and plausible, and not to be there just to be oogled at. I wanted it to be a romantic setting, and so I wanted all the female characters to be treated on equal level as the male characters, so we wouldn't be separating them. That being said, of course, in the setting there are certain exceptions. Obviously we have these slave traders and Baruch Malkat and so forth, and as Nick will mention later, the demon image, which ended up being on our cover. So the irony, of course, is that I wanted to present women as on equal footing as the men in the setting, and then we throw in this scantily clad female character on our cover.
Some of my favorite images are of Thornshroud. The overall concept of just how evil and despicable this creature is something that caused us to go back and forth over it a bit. I think that the final project was much better for it, though. The image of him licking that skull like some sick good luck charm still disturbs me, though.
Yeah, Thornshroud is probably on my top 10 all-time favorite images for Amethyst. He's actually derived from another image that Nick will talk about, which we'll talk about later, called Gebermak. And Gebermak is the principal singular villain that presents himself as a potential foe. We'll hear the mention of a name called Mengus, which is this kind of our dark god in the setting. This dark force that is responsible for most of the wickedness in the setting. But Gebermak is the ground general and the most powerful foe the players will encounter. As a result, he's actually not presented as a monster in the first book. He's presented in later. Thornshroud is presented in the first book as an actual villain. He's less powerful. He's built on the same ground as Gebermak. Gebermak, of course, is this very powerful general. He has the nickname the Armor of 1,000 Plates because of all these different pieces of his armor which shouldn't work. There's no reason this armor should function in the way it is. And Thornshroud's based on that same idea. He's not composed to as many plates, but he is based on the same type of theme. The distinction with him being that, unlike Gebermak, Thornshroud actually has a face, a human face. Still an evil character, mind you, and as a result takes a lot of joy in what he does. He is a very despicable character, and as a result of the importance of that character, we did go through him through a lot of iterations and variations with that until we got to the final piece.